Thanks for coming to listen to me. Has anyone heard of Tartaria before? Oh, wow. Makes a change. Well, I've written a couple of books. The first one's called Tesla and the Cabbage Patch Kids, and I'll tell you why it's called that in a moment. And once that was released, I put a survey up onto social media asking people which chapter they liked the most. And it was Cabbage Patch Babies, the whole concept of human cloning and our origins. So I then did a much deeper dive on how did we get here, and that's the sequel to it. But the talk today is mainly about Tartaria and the connection between Nikola Tesla and the Cabbage Patch Children. But first of all, who am I? Well, I'm a conspiracy theorist, apparently. I wear a tinfoil hat, and apparently I should receive no medical assistance because I'm not vaccinated, so I deserve to die if anything happens to me. My journey started. My journey started about 40 years ago. My dad, he joined the Freemasons, and he started leaving books lying around for me to read as a teenager. The first one was From Atlantis to the Sphinx. He then started reading David Icke's books. He then joined the Freemasons, started leaving bits and pieces around for me to pick up, and I then cracked his briefcase open and started reading everything and got his apron out. And my mum said, your dad wears that the first Thursday of every month when he goes off to bake cakes with his friends. It's his pinny. So I joined when I was old enough to find out exactly what... Are we all right there, Dan?
Just lowering you a bit because you're...
Now I can't hear me. Can you hear me all right? Yeah?
You don't need to
Okay. So I joined the Freemasons when I was old enough because I wanted to find out, that's me on the right, obviously, with my youngest son on the left. So I wanted to find out what he knew. And I progressed up to Master Mason, and then I was a year away from actually becoming the Worshipful Master. And I spoke to somebody about what I would find out. What do I get to know? You know, are you going to tell me who built the pyramids? Are you going to tell me more about King Solomon? You know, what actually happens? And they said, you're not high ranking enough. If you were in the flying squad, like most of us here, you'd already know all of this. So I left. Now, after what I've written in my first book, apparently they don't want me ever back. And that works for me. So the first chapter of my book is, has history been rewritten? The answer to that is yes. It really has been rewritten. I don't know if anybody here reads anything of John Hamer, any of his work, but the falsification of history is well worth looking into. I started looking into wars and really why they take place, and it's not necessarily about peace, because I consider fighting for war is a little bit like having sex to preserve virginity. War is often to do with removing architecture that they don't want, things that people are starting to question. So it's also about that, and I think the what happened after the 9/11 towers were, well, sabotaged, blown up, not flown into, whatever you want to choose. We saw then, within a few weeks, the first thing to be bombed in the Middle East was actually the alleged tomb of Gilgamesh. And they flew that out, and a friend of mine was actually there on security and watched the whole thing roll out. So I think a lot of civilization is destroyed through war, but actually that's not perhaps why we're told they've gone to war. They're looking to actually get rid of things. But also it's a brilliant opportunity to wipe people out as well. We saw pandemics start. We've had cholera outbreaks. We've had, obviously the bubonic plague. The Spanish flu, which was introduced by the Rockefeller Institute when they jabbed a load of American soldiers before they sent them off to Europe, and it's just called the Spanish flu. I'm sorry if I'm teaching anyone here to suck eggs, but it's called the Spanish flu simply because Spain was the only country where the newspapers weren't censored. So they were the first to report on it. It got the name Spanish flu, but it was actually Rockefeller that caused it. So I don't suppose that comes as much of a surprise to anybody. So they've wiped people out through war. They've wiped people out through pandemics. And perhaps they do the same with medical interventions they provide during these pandemics. With regard to our history, if you're not familiar with him, I would recommend looking at the work of Anatoly Fomenko. Now, he's a Russian mathematician and scientist, along with several of his colleagues. He calculated that 800 years were added to our timeline in 1776, making the year actually 976 AD. And I found that quite hard to believe, but I spent 5 years reading his work and it makes sense. He said a lot of people that we consider to be historical figures, like Napoleon Bonaparte, for example, are fictitious. And periods of time introduced, like the Dark Ages, where nothing really happened, to give a backstory for this slow progression of our evolution, technologically and architecturally too. But actually it appears we've gone backwards. If we look at technology that is claimed to have happened and existed in Egypt and Atlantis, then we think that the kit I've got now it's technology, but harnessing energy from the ether and using frequency and vibration to heal your internal organs, that's technology. I think what we've got now is just designed to actually cause us more harm than good. But it doesn't stop the kids queuing for the latest iPhone to pay to have something that takes a photo of you every 20 seconds and obviously emits radiation. That's not technology. I think these are kind of weapons or technology that's been weaponized to cause nothing but harm. So Anatoly Fomenko believes that in 1776 the year was 976, and this aligns with the correction I'm often given. People say to me, you keep referring to Tartaria as Tartaria. It's not. It's the millennial reign of Christ. Now, I'm not religious, but I can understand where they're coming from, because if Christ reigned for 1,000 years, and the year of the New World Order starting, which most people know from the back of the American dollar bill, is 1776, the 4th of July, and the Statue of Liberty demonstrates that, then he was born in 3 BC. If he died in 976 AD, then we're not a million miles away from it being a millennial reign. And the period we're in now, which is New World Order, is also referred to as Satan's little season. So there's definitely a connection there. But as I said, I'm not religious. I've read the Bible back to front several times, and I was ordained years ago, only because I wanted to learn more. But actually I find the Book of Enoch far more interesting. It's the books they left out. The Book of James, Jesus' brother, that no one talks about. The Book of Giants. These are far more interesting, but they're all still in the Ethiopian Bible, which I have, and that's certainly worth a read. Read the books we're not supposed to. So Tartaria is a sort of blanket term, really, for a period of time where things were built by what they call the angels. And by that they mean people that had knowledge of working with frequency, cymatics and vibration, to make sure when you were inside a building that it resonated at the same frequency as all living matter, which is 432 hertz. But Rockefeller changed all of that, and I'll go into that a bit later. There's also evidence that our history has been whitewashed. Now, I don't know how well you can see that. The person on the left is apparently Abraham Lincoln, and according to a lot of researchers, the person on the right is the real Abraham Lincoln. Everything has been whitewashed by 13 parasite families that wanted everything to be credited to them and their ilk. Caucasians. They wanted everything whitewashed. They've done it with buildings, they've done it with our history as well. And if you go online, you can actually see, and also I put some in my book, there are lots of references, even old coins that I've found, where the people that I'm told are kings and queens of England don't look anything like what I found on the back of the coin. So there's strong evidence that that has happened. So the Tartarian Empire itself is a blanket term, as I said earlier on. It's an expanse of land. It's the northern hemisphere, mainly Russia and Asia, but it went into Eastern Europe as well. But their ethos travelled. The way they build, the way they live, working with frequency and vibration, went everywhere. And that's why we see buildings in places like Samoa or Rio de Janeiro that actually look like they should be in Rome. And we give them this sort of term, Greco-Roman style. But they were built in places that had never been to Greece or Rome by architects that hadn't either, but they all look the same. So this is shared knowledge, a way of building. And again, these particular buildings, like the Vatican, I suppose St. Paul's would be a good example. Most people know what that looks like. inside that building it resonates at 432 hertz, as does an opera house, and cathedrals used to too. So this is the area, and this is a very early map from the 1500s by someone called John Speed. It's called the New World Map. And if anybody wants a copy of it, I can email them. My email address is in the back of my book. I can email a high resolution image over. There are a lot of maps out there. So we know that the actual expanse of land existed, but what we don't know is why it was destroyed. At least we didn't. And I'm going to share with you who did it and why, and then show you a CIA document, which I can forward to anybody who wants it, to show exactly how they did it, why they did it, and when the document became declassified. And that's why a lot of people hadn't heard of Tartaria until relatively recently, because the CIA document wasn't available. And it also had a flag. It's often referred to as Tartary, Great Tartaria, Great Tartary, the Tartarian Empire, the Millennial Reign, the Empire of Free Energy. It's also referred to as that because they were harnessing energy, which they believe is an echo of Atlantis. Somebody somewhere was passing this knowledge down through people. But who were the Tartarians? Well, probably the most, in biblical terms, the most famous ruler of Tartaria would be Magog. He was actually the beginning. His brother was the beginning of the Celts, and he was the beginning of Tartaria. Gilgamesh, and if anybody has ever read the Epic of Gilgamesh will know that that's really where our first Bible came from. The first king, Gilgamesh, believed to be half Anunnaki and half Homo sapien. We don't know. But all we do know is that what evidence there was of Gilgamesh was taken from the Middle East during the illegal invasion of Iraq. King Solomon, which I learned quite a bit about when I joined the dark side and became a Freemason, is probably the first king that most people would know of. And King Solomon's temple, built by Hiram Abiff, again, worked in the same way as a cathedral. It was vibrating at 432 hertz, and this is shared sacred geometry being passed down. Genghis Khan, perhaps the more better known ruler of Tartaria, not the person that you've read about, I'm pleased to say. He wasn't a warmonger. I've got a couple of books that I've referenced and removed parts from. I say removed, taken the good bits from and put them in my book so you can read a little bit more about him. He actually built an incredible amount of temples. He introduced passports so people could travel freely without being hindered. He gave protection to people from Europe travelling into the Tartaria region. So what we've been told about him has been inverted, and that appears to be the same for a lot of historical figures. They invert. And that way you see someone as a foe when actually they were out there doing good. And they've done that with quite a few people. They did that with a fellow with a Charlie Chaplin moustache during the Second World War. You know, the Rothschilds decide that they don't like him collapsing their bank, so they pay the British Empire to go and finish off what they started in World War One. Where if you look at what happened in Dresden, Nagasaki, Hiroshima, the Allies committed, well, genocide. They destroyed architecture, they targeted refugee towns and cities, they hit 2 islands that had no significance whatsoever, just to destroy architecture and completely destroy people's morale. And Genghis Khan's a prime example of that. Oddly enough, when people correct me and say stop saying Tartaria, it's the millennial reign of Christ, Jesus' name was Yeshua. His father was Yeshua, born the same time and lived in the same place. And people have often said, is there a connection? You know, Jesus spent a lot of time in Tibet during the lost years. Is there a connection? Could he possibly be his son? I don't know. But that's a deep dive. And it's an interesting conversation with ChatGPT as well. The last queen of Tartaria, the last ruler of Tartaria, is Genepil. And you'll recognise her in a moment if anybody's ever watched the Star Wars films. In plain sight, we've actually used people from Tartaria in science fiction. Unfortunately, because she was the last queen of Tartaria, the Second World War was really the last clean-up job, removing the empire. And there she is with Padme from Star Wars on the right. So you can see. Genepil. 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 Yeah, so she's the last queen. But what the Russians did was, while she was pregnant, shot her in the back. So that's the last photo of her. And that's the last royal bloodline from Tartaria.
After the Russian Revolution, yeah?
Yeah. I've sort of broken down what happened in that, yeah, in the book. But yeah, and it just shows you, go the Allies. The Tartarians themselves came in all shapes and sizes as well. And as you can see from that image, well, those two images there, some of them were big, really big. And that's why some of the doors on these Greco-Roman style buildings that we have are so high. The windows are too high to see out of. The ceilings are too high to actually physically heat the room, not using what they had allegedly, from what we're told from the narrative. The means they had to heat a room wasn't sufficient enough to heat something with a 20-foot high ceiling. So a lot of them were quite large, but they did get rid of most of them in the Second World War. By then, most of them were killed off. And that's an interesting Google as well. I've got images in my book, but some of them actually fought in the war. And these weren't people with a genetic mutation or giantism. These were people that were considerably taller than us, anything up to 12 feet tall. And there are some images online of actually the last ones being rounded up and arrested and then taken away during World War II. So yes, they came in all shapes and sizes, as you can see from here. So who wrote about them? Where am I getting all this information from? Well, the first person to write about Tartaria was Marco Polo in a book called My Travels. And again, what I've done is taken the juicy bits out and put that in my book, so you don't have to read the whole thing. I'm trying to save a lot of work for people if they're interested, but of course you can probably go online to somewhere like eBay and get a copy of that book. It's actually quite small, but it's quite intense. So Marco Polo wrote about his times in Tartaria and his times with Genghis Khan. And that's where you'll start to read a very different picture about who that person was. There's no mention of him even suggesting to harm someone. So I think it's a good example of history being inverted. So Marco Polo wrote about him in My Travels. The next person to write about him that people would recognise would be Peter Fleming, the brother of Ian Fleming, My Travels in Tartaria. Again, I've took the best bits out, so you haven't got to read through the entire book. But he wrote about his time there and actually what he saw and how he was seeing buildings that just shouldn't have been there. Palaces everywhere, people meditating, peace and harmony. He couldn't understand how this was happening, because at the time he was actually an MI6 agent along with his brother. So I think he was actually specifically sent there to actually do some research and find out what was going on. But it's also been used in science fiction as well. Jules Verne, for example. If anyone's familiar with Jules Verne's work, there's a lot of references to Tartaria and their technology in that as well, and a lot of inventions actually that ended up being credited to Nikola Tesla, you can see in his work. And H.G. Wells. H.G. Wells's work contains a lot of what we call antiquitech, technology that predates the information he would have had available to him. So I think science fiction is used, and fiction is used often to get information out to us subliminally, and I think that's because they're kind of, these parasites are kind of trying to avoid karmic retribution. They think it's like the poisoned apple analogy, where if I tell you what's going on and you don't believe me because it's classed as fiction, then that's on you. In the same way that if I give you an apple, laugh and say I've just injected it with poison and you eat it, you've just committed suicide. But if I don't tell you, I've killed you. So I think karmic retribution is something the parasites fear. And the reason I call them parasites is because a lot of people refer to them as the elite. And I don't understand what's elite about these people. They are parasitic. They live off us in more ways than one. It's not just about taking our money from us in taxation. They actually live off our energy as well. So I think parasites living off other people is perhaps the best description for them. Back to the Future is also a good one. The first film where they're trying to get the flux capacitor back up and running, and they use the electricity generated from a bolt of lightning that hits a Tartarian building, and then bang, away they go. The flux capacitor's back up and running. So you see it in there. Night at the Museum as well. Ghostbusters, the first Ghostbusters film. It's all about Tartaria and energy being harnessed from the ether. So it's there in plain sight. But it's not until you know that you go back and watch these films that you realise that all along they were softly disclosing this information with us. So what did the Tartarians do? Well, as I said earlier on, they built using cymatics. And the interesting thing is, if you look at a cathedral or a church window, all of those shapes are formed by looking at what happens to water molecules when subjected to different frequencies. And again, 432 hertz is a typical one. Well, if we follow the narrative, that would suggest that this is pure coincidence that these windows look like that. But if we actually dig a little bit deeper, the people that built those had the ability to look at water molecules under a microscope before the microscope was invented. The word cathedral actually comes from cathode rao, and they weren't places of worship. Jesus actually told us, and again, I'm not religious, by the way, I've just found the book quite interesting when you read between the lines, so I don't want to sound like I'm preaching up here and I'm about to get a dog collar on or anything like that. But cathode rao is a centre of energy. It's where people went to heal using frequency and vibration. The organ was called a pipe organ, and it's called organ because it resonated with your internal organs. So you went there to heal. You went there to meditate as well. And as Jesus said, you don't go somewhere to pray. It's something you do in solitude. Never go to a building to do that, and you certainly don't listen to someone telling you how to do it. That's a false prophet. Yet people do every Sunday and other days of the week go somewhere, and my guess is that a lot of them are listening to someone who's read the book, but they haven't read it themselves. And that's how a cathode rao works. An anode and a cathode. Generates electricity from static in the atmosphere, electromagneticity. It's then stored in copper tanks filled with red mercury, and that was then used to generate electricity. And that could power lighting, it could power an entire town. Perhaps the most beautiful thing, in my opinion, that the Tartarians built was star forts. Now, according to the Smithsonian's Institute, a star fort is a defensive fortress. But what they can't explain is why they are in such incredible detail, built in that particular way, who built them and when they were built. And they also can't explain why some of them are in places, the majority actually, are in places that would serve no defensive purpose whatsoever. They also can't explain why they align to constellations and the vibration between the walls is 432 hertz. And there are 432 of them on our realm, and they're worth looking at. Some of them are actually incredible. Probably the most famous one is the one that Lucifer is stood on, the Statue of Liberty. And they're everywhere. This particular one's in Holland. They're all over the world. But they also built these buildings with what we call onion domes. That's where the copper tank is. They were harnessing energy. So you would go into one of those places to meditate. People didn't live in there. There were no toilets or bathrooms or kitchens in these buildings. And that's why people think that we used to throw our waste into the street. We didn't do that. These buildings didn't have toilets for a different reason. But I won't go into too much detail on that. All I'd say is study breatharianism. And I guess there's probably people here that know about that. To absorb your nutrients from the sun in the same way a plant does. This is one of the World's Fairs. They had World's Fairs all over the world, literally, and some more than one. Now, this is the Chicago World's Fair, built in 9 months. This is one of the smaller buildings. 9 months to build, no record of labour, no record of where the materials came from. A third of the population of America attended, there's no records for that, and there was nowhere to stay. And as with all the World's Fairs, it was open for 9 months and then destroyed by an accidental fire. This is marble and granite, burnt. Crystal Palace in London is another example that had a fire. Alexandria Palace, where there was another World's Fair, that had a fire. They've all been destroyed. They weren't built for that intention. These were cities that the Tartarian people lived in. And by Tartarian, this is also the Moors, this is the Turks, the Moguls. This is a large group of people, but we refer to them as Tartarians because it's a blanket term and it's starting to gain momentum, so we've got to kind of keep using that. But what happened to them? Well, as I said earlier on, wars. The Napoleonic War was a brilliant opportunity, and I've actually spoken to someone whose ancestors were actually fought in that, and they said what they found most unusual was the fact that they were fighting people wearing the same uniform. So I think that it was an opportunity, the Napoleonic Wars, to create a fictitious figure who's based upon Apollo and blame them. And of course the clue's in the name, Napoleon Bonaparte. So it's, as Anatoly Fomenko suggested, this person didn't exist. They just create a figure so they can blame someone for what took place. If you read about Napoleon Bonaparte, by 25 he's the most powerful person in Europe, and in his spare time he's writing romantic novels. No living descendants, same as Nikola Tesla, no living descendants. So there's no one to back it up. We've got no evidence. So the Napoleonic Wars got rid of quite a few people. The American Civil War finished off a few more, and then we had a few acts of genocide, Armenia for example, getting rid of the old people. If we can get the men out of the way, and then there's something left we can do with the women and their children, but I'll tell you about that in a moment. So there were lots of acts of genocide. So they wiped out most people from the old world. So you've removed a generation of people that have memory. And that's why fires are wars are referred to as great. With each great, you've removed a generation of memory, and it becomes so diluted people can't remember anymore what happened. My grandparents wouldn't talk about the war. My grandfather was a squadron leader. We weren't allowed to talk about it. It was a no-go zone. Why? So the Great Fire of London, the Great Fire of Chicago, the Great War, it's just removing a little bit more history and shared knowledge each time a generation passes. We also had outbreaks. As most people know, they're nothing new. Cholera was a particularly nasty one. So they used outbreaks as well to get rid of people. And as we probably know, people who follow the work of Bill Gates will know that he's still doing that all over the world, giving people the opportunity to become seriously ill or die from one of his concoctions. Then they brought prisons into play. Before that, the odd castle had a jail, but there weren't really many prisons around. And suddenly, in the late 1700s and early 1800s, these red and white brick buildings became prisons. Built again to resonate at 432 hertz, originally with no toilets or kitchens. These were places where people used to congregate to worship, meditate, and learn how to raise their vibration and frequency. And the reason they're in red brick is because red brick can store electricity. It's the same chemical process that generates rust. A red and white brick building denotes a battery, a source of power. So these places were harnessing incredible energy. This particular prison is in America. But along with the prisons, they introduced asylums too. You can probably see a pattern starting to emerge. These buildings are all the same. Now we went from having no prisons to, by the mid-1800s, having hundreds of prisons all over the world. Who were they putting in them? Well, it's the people that didn't fight, the people that wouldn't comply, particularly the men, because they had a plan for the women. But the men were sent to prison that would not follow New World Order. So you've got to think FEMA camp. It's just another reset. And this one's an orphanage. So you can start to see a pattern emerging here. They're storing people's energy in these buildings. And the clue is in what happens in the judicial process. You're charged and placed in a cell. What they did with a lot of the bodies that, from the people that fell, during the Napoleonic Wars in particular, was they gave the bodies back to farms here in Britain to use as fertiliser. So when people say what happened to the people that died in the Napoleonic Wars, the answer is we ate them. Indirectly we ate them. But it gets better than that. We used their teeth as well. Waterloo teeth became the most expensive and sought after dentures that you could possibly get. And then we ate off them as well, if you were lucky enough to be able to afford bone china. What did they do with the skulls? Catacombs. They're everywhere. Most people think of Paris, maybe Edinburgh. They're all over the world. There are catacombs everywhere. A lot of people say there's one actually under the Tor in Glastonbury. There's a catacomb there. And these are people that have been in there, actually been inside. So they got rid of the evidence. But fortunately, a few years ago, a document was released by the CIA. And I'll read it out to you because I don't think you're going to be able to see that very well. So I'm asked all the time, apart from sort of old books and maps and old encyclopedias you've got, is there any evidence you've got from the government, any government or agency wishing to remove Tartaria? Yes, I've got the entire document, and I lost my Facebook account for sharing it a few years ago, but I'm back now, and I'm happy to email it to anybody who wants it. So I'll just quickly read this out to you. On 9th of August 1944, the Central Committee of the Communist Party, sitting in Moscow, issued a directive order, the party's Tatar Provincial Committee, to proceed to a scientific revision of the history of Tartaria, to liquidate serious shortcomings and mistakes of a nationalistic character committed by individual writers and historians in dealing with Tatar history. In other words, Tatar history was to be rewritten. Let us be frank, was to be falsified in order to eliminate references to Great Russian aggressions and to hide the facts of the real course of Tatar-Russian relations. And it goes on and on about what they did and how they did it. But who actually did it? It's the same people. They originally were called the Phoenicians, but today we know them as the Jesuits. They're behind everything. They infiltrated over a period of 200 years every town and city, every government, every church and organisation were infiltrated by the Jesuits. And it's depicted, they've actually got images that you can find online of them showing a brief information attached to each one, showing you how they did it and why, and actually quite proud of it as well. And a lot of their images that you can find online are quite satanic too. Today they're run by a man called Pepe Orsini. Has anyone heard of Pepe? Yeah, the Orsini family. Obviously, they're the head honchos, although Amun-Ra or Marduk left everything to the Rothschilds, or back then he said the Ra-childs. Pepe Orsini is the boss. That's the man who runs, he sits at the top of the pyramid of power. He's the Grey Pope. There's not a lot of information you can find on him, and his little organisation called Club of Rome is the only organisation that you can't find anything about on YouTube. It's completely censored. There are no podcasts, no videos, nothing at all, just videos the Club of Rome have put up themselves. There is nothing. That's control, because you can find as much as you like about the Trilateral Commission, the Council of 13, it's all there. But Club of Rome, YouTube will not put anything up that mentions them, nothing at all, apart from their own propaganda. So when people say to me, who actually sits at the top of this pyramid of power? That's the bastard there.
Did you call him the Grey Pope?
He's the Grey Pope.
Right, and are you covering the White Pope and the Black Pope?
No, because they're just puppets. They're not relevant to anything. But yes, the Black Pope's interesting, but obviously the White Pope is just someone wearing a costume. Perhaps. Pepe Orsini? You're too young to remember Pepe jeans, I'd imagine. P-E-P-E, and then Orsini is O-R-S-I-N-I. Pepe Orsini.
They're from the family of the Phoenicians, aren't they?
Yeah, Phoenicians, yeah. So the Phoenicians sort of morphed. The the Phoenician originally the Phoenicians were Tartarian. They were all the same people, but they split into the Scythians and the Phoenicians, and obviously the Phoenicians introduced, well, banking ultimately, maritime law, admiral law, and now the Jesuits morphed into the Jesuits. And so they wiped them out, as I said earlier on, by a series of wars. And this one, I thought I'd show you this because it's quite interesting. This is an illustration of the Napoleon comet, the Imperial comet of 1811. Now, a lot of people believe that it wasn't a comet in 1811 that literally flattened most of Europe. It was actually a direct energy weapon. I wasn't there, I don't know, and I can't find anything more about it, but what I do find quite interesting is another depiction which at the time shows the 13 heads of the 13 bloodline families in the tail of the comet. They also caused mud floods. Again, this could be connected to either spiking the energy grid that we're on, ley lines if you like. By spiking that, they can cause earthquakes. But the quake of New Madrid in 1812 wiped out a great deal of architecture and buried it in mud. And this is what we call mud floods. So if you check the town or city where you live, you'll find that in the late 1700s towards the 1900s, it will have had a fire or a flood. And there'll be evidence of that with a lot of the buildings that are present. You'll have lost parish records as well in fires too. But the quake of New Madrid is a significant one. It's certainly worth looking into. And this is what happened afterwards. And this happened everywhere. They had to dig out, they dug out railways and said that they built them. They dug out towns and cities and buildings and said that they constructed them. And this is allegedly a construction photograph. But there's no one building anything. And that's what we call a mud flood window. I used to have an art gallery and it had the same windows. And I asked the landlord, why did they bother doing that? This is years ago. Why did they bother doing that? Why have a little window? He said, well, it was the servants' quarters downstairs. They had to let a bit of light in. I said, oh, that's bullshit. I don't believe that for one moment. And he said, well, actually, I tend to agree with you. And he took me to the basement and there was a stud wall. And there was a part that a panel you could remove, and behind the panel was the original front doors of the building. The ground floor became a basement. And I said to him, what happened? And he said, well, you won't believe this, but there was a fire. They pushed all of the rubble and debris and detritus into the street and then tarmacked over the top of it. And so everybody that had a ground floor now had a basement. Because if you think about it, what a basement's actually good for? Damp. That's it. They're not good for anything else. And why would you go down when you can just go up? There's no logical reason for that. But you'll find these everywhere. So next time you're walking through a town or a high street in a city and you see these windows peeking out, that is not a small window. That's a huge full-size window, but they're just showing you the top of it because the rest is buried. And often it'll be 2 or 3 stories as well, deep, and sometimes even more than that. So that's what they call a mud flood window. It's the remains of what you saw in that earlier photograph of that town that was completely covered in mud. Raise it up, give everyone a couple of basement floors. The other thing that they did to help wipe them out, and this was by John Rockefeller, J.D. Rockefeller, he very kindly, for the war effort, thought it would be a good idea to have the church bells removed to be melted down to make ammunition. They were all built to resonate at 432 hertz. They were replaced with church bells that resonate at 440 hertz, which is quite harmful. So that's what's in a church now. At the same time, he got it as a worldwide standard. So music was changed to 440 hertz too. Now, my question is, if they were melted down to make ammunition, how did they replace them? Did they go around and find the shells? Did they pick the bullets out of the dead? You know, how did they replace them? Well, they didn't. These were buried and someone dumped at sea. They were never melted down. They were destroyed or hidden. And they were hidden so you could no longer go into a church or a cathedral and heal yourself because he's Mr. Pharmaceutical. You know, Gates has got nothing on this man. So that was another way of actually destroying part of it. But the interesting thing with the population, when you look at the wars and the number of people that died and the number of people that were walking around, in 1776 we had 770 million people. I don't know how they calculated that because there's going to be a lot of indigenous people within that number, but that's the estimate. You can see that it's doubled within 100 years, which is quite difficult because although people tended to have larger families, the children didn't always make it. But the really weird thing is, during the same period of time, 3.35 billion people died. How does that add up? I mean, that's, you know, primary school maths will tell you that you can't go from, well, first of all, you can't double the population in 100 years, But secondly, how do you manage to kill or lose almost 3 times the amount of people that existed? So something's not quite right. And I think the same is true today. I don't think the population figures we're given are right. I think they're overinflating it to say that we're overpopulated, but actually, anyone who's ever been on a plane knows when you look out the window, you don't see much. Most of our land's barren. The incubator babies were then introduced, and you mentioned that earlier on, I think. Did you ask me about the incubator babies earlier? Sorry, I didn't mean to target you. So the incubator babies, these were babies that went on exhibition at World's Fairs all over the world. In America, the babies came from New York, and these were premature babies that would normally have died. And they were put on display in World's Fairs and exhibitions. But the weird thing is that in London, the babies came from Paris, maternity hospitals in Paris, and I don't understand how they managed to get them from A to B. These were critical. So I don't understand really how that took place. A lot of people believe that actually the babies that were on display were ones that had been created, cloned, Cabbage Patch babies. And it was a way of actually introducing them. And this was done through the orphan train movement, baby farms as well. And one of the selling points with the incubator babies was that you could speed up the growth of a baby in just a few weeks. So a baby that's born 2 months prematurely, in literally a matter of days in some cases, they could get it to actually be fully developed. We're not sure how they did that. But the other interesting thing, or rather sickening thing, is that at the end of the World's Fairs, you could buy the babies that were on display. And this one's the Luna World's Fair in New York. And the person behind it is Martin Cooney, that's him there, a German doctor, except I've done some digging on him. He's got no medical qualifications whatsoever, nothing at all. Which moves on to the Cabbage Patch babies. So in the late 1800s, a series of postcards became really popular, based allegedly upon Slavic folklore that babies come from cabbages. And my mum was told this. My grandfather is from Crimea, and she was told that she was found at the bottom of the garden in a cabbage patch because they didn't want to explain the reproduction system to a child. But these postcards get darker and darker the more you dig into them. This one actually shows you a middle-class couple going to buy a baby from a cabbage patch. Dolores Cannon refers to these people as soulless. Today we call them NPCs, but ultimately they're clones. That's what we're talking about. The repopulation after an empire has been completely destroyed by children with no history. And there's a lot of these. So they're worth looking at. They're called repopulation postcards, Babylon postcards, or Cabbage Baby postcards. And some of them are a little darker still, because some of the postcards that became available showed babies actually for sale, as these do here. But my favourite one, which is full of Masonic symbology, actually shows a baby making machine. They put cabbage seeds in the top, babies pop out the bottom, and then they're available for sale. The first narrated movie is called The Cabbage Fairy, and it's by Alice Guy, and she'd been a secretary for a movie company in Paris for 2 years, and then became the first director, actor, and writer, and produced the first narrated movie. It's called The Cabbage Fairy, and in it she shows babies being plucked from cabbages that are growing in a cabbage patch. She got the inspiration from Martin Cooney because she visited the Paris World's Fair and saw the incubator babies on display, and that inspired her to write and make this film. The only problem is the film came out a year before the exhibition took place. So it's a bit of a feeble backstory. The second movie that she made is called Midwife to the Upper Classes, and I'd recommend watching that. It is on YouTube. It's quite disturbing. She picks up babies from the cabbage patches and then drops them on the floor. They're being moved by their arms and hands and legs and left screaming. They're in distress. And a lot of people say that have watched it, it's like they've never seen a baby before. Yeah, that's exactly what it is.
What's the name of the
Midwife to the upper classes. I can't pronounce it in French, I'm afraid. And the first one is the Cabbage Fairy, and it's Alice Guy. Spelled exactly as it sounds. So, cloning. A lot of this sort of is based upon the theory that they've been cloning for some time. The alternative theory is, of course, that we crawled out of the mud, slowly developed limbs, and, you know, we're here today. I don't believe Charles Darwin's Origin of Species at all. It was funded by the Vatican to start with. And the reason I don't believe it is because of me. If we are supposed to evolve to meet our environment, then why do I burn in the sun, get hay fever, and I'm lactose intolerant? What happened? I am not designed to live outside. I burn, you know. So I don't believe it, but I don't believe it for a number of reasons. Ultimately, the Vatican wanted to control an alternative narrative to Genesis, basically. And it was far better they were in control of an alternative theory of our existence than it came out and they had no control of it. So whether or not you're a believer in the story of Adam and Eve, in Genesis it's interesting because it describes taking the rib from one being to create another. Now I've had this argument with lots of people and they say, yeah, but it's just a metaphor. So, well, it's an old book, isn't it? Yeah. Well, why are they describing human cloning as a metaphor then? Because that's what they're saying. Whether it took place or not is kind of irrelevant. Whoever wrote that, Genesis, is telling you exactly the process you'd use to clone someone. So it's there in black and white. And obviously the Epic of Gilgamesh here, which is the oldest kind of biblical text that we have, obviously predates everything. The Bible is based upon that. When you say Amen, you're saying Amun-Ra, Marduk, the Anunnaki god. They created us to mine for them. They took the Neanderthal, tweaked the DNA, and out we pop. And that's why they can't explain why there are mutations within human DNA. It's been altered. No one can explain where and when that happened. But we're capped at 120 years, and we have an obey gene. So we will do what we're told to an extent. There's a company today called Clonaid, and the fella sat in the middle is Raelion, and he started the Raelion movement. His nickname's Rail, and he was a French racing car driver that started his own religion, a cult almost. His story is quite interesting because you'll recognise it. He was a sportsman. He then becomes a commentator. He then has an epiphany and starts preaching about alien beings. Now, some of you might have heard this before. So either they're both telling the truth and they're targeted because they're in positions where they're at a point in their lives where they have a voice that's going to be heard, and they're ready to receive this information and they can share it to more people, or there's something else going on, and I'm not sure what it is, but I'll find out in a couple of weeks' time, because David Icke just read my first book and he's invited me for a chat on the 28th of August. I've been on their channel before, but I've not met David, so but we'll see what happens. So the Raelian movement started a company called Clonaid, and they believe the Elohim created us. The Elohim and the Anunnaki, it's the same kind of thing, except the Elohim are seen in a much nicer light, I suppose, more benevolent and less nefarious than the Anunnaki, but the same principle, they created us. And he founded a company called Clonaid. If you go onto their website, you can actually get cloned. As long as you've got the money, they'll clone you, they'll clone your dog, they'll clone whatever you want. The services are there. You can fill in an application form online, and that's what they do. But they do it in Mexico because there are no laws in Mexico on cloning, and the same applies for Korea. So we've got a situation where there are a lot of men that have been killed in battle. That left a lot of women with children. So the Lunacy Act was introduced, and the Lunacy Act was grounds for losing your children to the state if your husband died in battle. That was one of their top reasons for committing. So the children are then used to provide us with a whole new workforce. And anybody who's looked into the Industrial Revolutions will know there aren't many adults in these images. Doesn't matter where you look, they're mostly kids. And then we come on to the minors. If you've ever wondered why children are referred to as minors, it's because that's what they did. And it's all connected to Tartaria. The further you dig, it becomes a warren. It's not a rabbit hole, it links everything. Why we use certain words, why we have the Lunacy Act, why we're charged and placed in a cell when we're committed, how we can treble the population in 100 years. It's all interconnected. And that's why I called the book Tesla and the Cabbage Patch Kids. But I'll tell you about Tesla in a minute. Some people say, why don't you just call it Tartaria? Because there's more to it than that. So who was Nikola Tesla? You all know about him, but for many people, they only recognise this image and probably hadn't heard of him until relatively recently. You certainly weren't taught about him at school. Yet he's responsible for the reason you had lights in your school and electricity. So why weren't we told about him? Why is there only one image of him, which you can actually align with Frank Zappa? They cross over perfectly. So my argument, which I've had with his museum, is that he didn't exist. He's got no siblings. He received everything in visions through communicating with Venetians. There's no video footage of him anywhere in the world, yet he was a pioneer in technology. There is of Edison, there is of Einstein, but none of him. Why would that be? He is the equivalent of, and I hate to say it because I don't rate this guy at all, but he's what you would compare to as Elon Musk today. Someone who allegedly has this brilliant mind that invents things that change life, which of course he doesn't. He just employs people that are very good at it, criticises the government but gets all his funding from them. So we know that he's a dark character, but back in the day that would have been your equivalent of Elon Musk. No video footage. Why? They said they think he might have been camera shy. And I said, well, that's strange because people used to pay him to attend dinner parties and give talks. So if he's afraid to get up and do a talk, why wouldn't someone have filmed it? I don't understand. Someone then contacted me and said they were the great niece of Nikola Tesla and he did exist. I pushed them a bit further and Donald Trump stopped them from talking to me. I did wonder if she was medicated when she said that, but there you go. So we only know a couple of photographs of him. The main one is the most popular that we've all seen. One of him when he was middle-aged. We know about Wardenclyffe Tower, where he was harnessing energy from the ether. Where he was getting this information from, we're not sure, because he was using Tartarian technology. So how did he know that you could do this? Why did he commit all of his work to this? He was getting JP Morgan to pay for him to produce radio transmissions, when actually secretly he's building something that harnesses energy. He wanted to give the world free energy. So my question is, where did he get this knowledge from? Was he communicating with Venetians and having these visions? He said he never wrote anything down. But when he died, and that's just before, that's the last photo of him, it doesn't even look like him, but allegedly that's the last image of him. He was in the Hotel New Yorker. The FBI raided the room when he was pronounced dead, and it took 2 vans to remove all of the documents from his hotel room. 2 vans, 1 hotel room. That doesn't really make any sense. And they were taken to a secure warehouse, never to be seen again. 3 documents never arrived. John G. Trump, Donald's uncle, is the person that went in and removed everything. And the 3 documents he didn't hand over to the FBI all relate to time travel. At the same time, 3 books were published by Ingersoll Lockwood. The Last President, which is about a show-busy business tycoon in New York who suddenly becomes the President of the United States. And then you've got The Adventures of Baron Trump, where Baron Trump's mentor is Don, and they live in Castle Trump. It all seems to interconnect. So there's a theory out there that actually there's some time travel going on. There's also a theory that these books weren't written when they were written. They were actually written just before Trump's first term in office, and it was a publicity stunt. We don't know. All we do know is no one bought them when they were first published. He was a lawyer. No one bought them at all. They're only popular now. So, where did the missing time travel documents go? Why are they about Baron Trump and his mentor Don? it kind of begs a few questions, doesn't it? And then you've got Donald's son, Barron, who is what, 6'9"? The Russian accent's gone. Very confident person. What's going on there? Will Trump be the last president? Is that what he's going to do? Is he going to change? Will he hand it down to Barron? I don't know. But they're certainly worth looking into, the books, if you've not read them, Ingersoll Lockwood. And that's his hotel room. People believe that actually he was building an energy harnessing kit, I suppose, or mechanism, actually inside the hotel itself. And that's why the FBI raided. They weren't after his documents. There weren't 2 van loads of documents. They actually deassembled the machine that he'd built. And that's what's taken away, because he actually famously quoted, he never wrote anything down. All of his experiments worked just as the visions suggested they would. So why would you need 2 vans to fill full of documents that were never written? So maybe they did take what he built apart. But people in the area said that building used to vibrate. We'll see. So the conclusion is probably best summed up really by 2 people, the first being David Rockefeller. I'll read this out because you probably can't see it very well. Some even believe we are part of a secret cabal working against the best interests of the United States, characterizing my family and me as internationalists and conspiring with others around the world to build a more integrated global political and economic structure. One world, if you will. If that's the charge, I stand guilty, and I'm proud of it. But I think George Orwell put it best. He who controls the past controls the future. He who controls the present controls the past. We know their names, and I'm doing my best to expose what they've done. If you can wipe out 1,000 years and an entire civilization that worked in harmony and balance with the planet like we should do today, where they worked on healing, self-preservation and raising their frequency and vibration, if they're capable of that, then sticking something in your arm in 2020 and telling you it's going to stop you getting a flu virus is a drop in the ocean. So ultimately, I think all we can do really to stop them seeing this Great Reset through now, which is the last chapter of my book, it's a circle. It starts off with the first reset, Great Reset, 1776, and ends with the Great Reset right now. And it's watching history completely repeat itself. And I think we need to forget about what colour we are, what football team we support, what religion we follow, what music we like and don't like. And we need to unite, because I think they're scared of us. And there are a lot of us. And I think if we can just disengage, and people say to me, oh yeah, what I do now is I spoil my vote. Don't vote, you're participating. Throw it in the bin. Don't vote, they can't form a government if we don't vote. Then what? Then maybe we can take back power. But I think unity is the answer. That's how the Tartarians lived. They say that's how the Atlanteans lived. That's how we should be living. So I think unity ultimately is where we need to be. Anyway, that's it. Thank you for listening. I hope you found that interesting, apart from you yawning at the back. You're all right there. Anyone got any questions they'd like to ask?
Can I ask about, you said Tesla didn't exist, but there was something going on?
We're not sure if he existed. What I'm saying is I found nothing to suggest he did.
So then what was the stuff going on in the hotel room?
It's just people saying that, so it could quite easily be a bit of a backstory. So we don't know if he existed or not, and simply because there's no evidence to suggest that he did. Perhaps the biggest part of that is that there is no video footage of a pioneer in technology. The 300 odd patents that he produced, so they can credit them to a person and not say that actually these are things we found. So there's a person there that they can point everything to in the same way they did with Napoleon. So do the government say that we've found these documents, we've found some old technology from a previous civilization, or do they find some crazy old man who invents this stuff in his yeah, so that's what they tend to do. So they release this information, and of course what also they do with technology is they wait until the product is at a point where it can be sold to the public. So they can either weaponize it, like we see with Wi-Fi and 5G masts and so on, where we actually queue up to buy something that's harming us, or a microwave. Or they wait until there's something that they can do with it where they can make an incredible amount of money. So to come up with someone and say that this man Nikola Tesla invented the remote control, the X-ray, alternating current, so on and so forth, that's an awful lot of inventions. I mean, he was coming up with one every 3 months that were groundbreaking. So that's the work of Anatoly Fomenko I mentioned at the start again, that he believes that there are fictitious characters throughout the whole of history that are used to give a backstory or a narrative to something that the deep state don't want us to know, that they have suppressed knowledge. It's why I joined the Freemasons. I wanted to know what they had. I wanted to know what was hidden. And, you know, it's above my pay grade. Hi.
Yeah, it's not a question. I don't know if you're aware, but there's a Gilbert Sullivan opera called HMS Pinafore, and in there is a character called Little Buttercup, and she practiced baby farming.
Yeah.
And that was written about 1876.
Yeah, that's based. Sorry.
Never questioned it, but now I know what she was talking about.
Yeah, the character's based upon Amelia Dyer, Britain's most notorious serial killer. So people would take, unmarried women would take their baby to a baby farm. They'd either pay for the baby to be looked after there until they were in a position to be able to go and get the baby back, but often that they were sent off to America or Australia. So by the time they went there to collect the child had gone. But those that perhaps cried a bit too much or needed a bit more attention than the others, she killed. Over 300 of them. And in my second book, which is about cloning, I've written a chapter all about her and how the baby farms were used to help repopulate.
She sold the opera by explaining that she swapped two babies out.
Yeah, that's kind of one of the nicer things that she did. Yeah. Yeah, but thank you for mentioning that, because I didn't include it. I should have done. Yeah, no, I know. Yeah, I know. So that character's based on Amelia Dyer. Yeah.
Where do you reckon the mud came from?
The mud?
Yeah.
Well, have you ever asked yourself when you watch something like Time Team why they have to dig so deep? You know, why would you, when you're looking for remains of an old building, why do we have to dig so far down? Where did all the mud come from, as you quite rightly said? Basically, it's masses of land, so hills. And I mean, in America, a lot of the mud floods were caused by melt water. So mountains that were originally covered in snow, that actually melting at such an incredible speed and temperature that it's actually, as it's melting, breaking up rock and forming mud and then solidifying quite quickly. So, and this happened everywhere. So in Europe it was called the Napoleon's Comet, or the Imperial Comet, but they had the same event in Russia and they had the same event in America as well. I can't remember.
You've got big plains, there's no hills or mountains.
Yeah, so there's some areas where it didn't take place, where the mud floods didn't take place. But in mountainous regions or hilly areas, I mean, and you're not talking about a little flood, you're talking about something, and you can have a look online at images of this, the floods that took place, because it's around, a lot of them around the time that we started seeing photographs for the first time being taken. You'll see most of them are flooded.
Got access to Tesla's knowledge. Tesla knowledge. You can do liquefaction of the earth.
Yeah,
So that will produce the mud.
yeah.
Because you can liquefy and make it liquid.
Yeah, but a lot of people think that it was actually caused by spiking the energy grid. So because the Earth's a huge circuit board, and so spiking it can actually cause actual disruption. So it's coming from inner Earth, if you like, underneath, and then, yeah. Sorry.
I don't, yeah. Have you heard that Genghis Khan was actually a Cossack?
No.
In Russia and the Ukraine, he was not a Mongol. It was actually Kublai Khan was the first
Yeah.
Asiatic.
Yeah. I know a little about him, but no, I've not heard him referred to in that one.
So you've got the Cuban Rus who are the Russians,
Yeah.
but they came from Ukraine, but the actual original Ukrainians were Tartarians.
Yeah, and there's a link to Ukraine with Jesus as well. There's a mound in Ukraine that's completely covered in crucifixes. People go there, and that's where they think he's actually buried.
interesting because I've got a friend who's from Kashmir, and they've got a shrine in part of the place that's being fought over at the moment, where they say St. Isa is buried. That's his burial place.
It's interesting that why they have these walls, isn't it? The Caucasian mountains as well. Some people think that it's there, or that actually that Noah's Ark is inside there. But there are different stories. I think cultures used. I think we're probably ultimately all talking about the same thing, but I think different cultures perhaps change terminology, or it's diluted. I mean, like the story of Noah's Ark, for example. The only place in the world you can find the wood that was used to build it is Florida. So I think different sort of cultures have different terms and different beliefs as well. I mean, he was referred to as a Christian, Genghis Khan, then a Muslim, then a Buddhist.
Because he basically allowed freedom of religion.
He did, yeah, which is unusual for a warmongering, yeah.
Yeah, but one last thing about on the mud flow. If you don't watch the TV, you probably don't watch the news, but
No.
Last week there was a massive flood in India, and just watch this. It's almost like diarrhea.
Yeah, yeah. Have you seen that it's happening quite a lot, and also the earthquake in Russia? That it's almost like we are, like I said a moment ago, we're sort of seeing history repeat itself. These things are happening all over again. Yeah, so yeah.
There was a theory, it's going back thousands of years, with Lemuria, Atlantis, Lemuria. Well, you're going to go there, you've got your smile on your face, you know all about that. Yeah. What do we know? It's everything's a narrative, but when you sank, that caused, and then these various things that have recurred in different formats over time, but the same story.
Yeah, and I think when I think of Atlantis, I think of the Great Flood, and then I think of Graham Hancock and the Younger Dryas period. And I think that that's why he was sort of trashed by the Guardian and the BBC, because he was talking about something that could actually suggest that that's the reason we saw the Great Flood and the reason that Atlantis fell. You just join a few more dots together, but apparently he's not allowed to go that far. But yeah, there are connections out there. And that's our job, I think. We've just got to piece them all together.
Yeah, I'm half Spanish, and in Spain they say that babies come from Paris, and I never understood that, but now I do.
Is another one for you? In Spain, they refer to children with autism as God's children, and I think that's really beautiful. Sorry, the young lady behind you. Sorry, first.
I've got two things. The first is I just heard it. I've not actually seen the website, but apparently in America they're selling, you know, the bells, the big bells. There's actually a website that's selling the old ones, the original Continental bells, for like $400 or something.
Yeah, there's. Sorry.
And then the other thing is, because I read in your book about Turkmenistan, and
Yeah.
had free energy until 2012, but I heard also like everyone's being like, oh yeah, it's really controlled now, and you can't go there. The government's horrible, no one goes out. But I don't know, do you think that's, because I saw this video of this guy who actually went there and had like a great time, but do you think that's just like people just saying that the government's controlled there, or like?
Yeah. Absolutely. They tell you, you probably know this, but they tell you that the people actually don't come out much. They stay indoors or underground. They never actually come out in Turkmenistan. But you're quite right, that had free energy until 2012. And I often wonder if it's the same story with North Korea. Are we really told the truth about that? I've applied to go, but I've never heard anything. But I've just got this funny feeling.
Well, how do you see Tartaria linking with Khazaria?
In what respect?
In terms of the area and the land, and because it seems to, a little bit what you were describing, the geography seems to overlap.
Yeah, it envelopes it.
In area, but are they completely? Is Khazaria like a completely degenerate version of Tartaria?
No, so Tartaria, as I was saying at the beginning, it's a blanket term. So we're calling this huge expanse of land Tartaria, when actually it consisted of lots of different regions, I suppose. One was Chinese Tartary, one's independent Tartary, Lesser Tartary, Greater Tartary, and it's just a blanket term, but it actually encompassed lots of different civilizations and cultures.
So the Khazars are completely separate.
Yeah, but part of, they fell under the region, and the ethos and the build structure. And it's the same with the Turks. They were also enveloped into it.
Can I just ask about this missing 1,000 years?
Yeah.
And like trying to square that up with like parish records and like family, you know, like this when the Normans came across and the barons. I mean, people can trace their lineage.
Some people can, yeah. Some people are able to do that, yeah, but not very many.
Not many, no.
No, and I believe personally that is because those that are fortunate enough to be able to trace their family tree right back all the way. I mean, first of all, we don't know if what they're looking at is correct. We don't know if it's been falsified. We've got no way of knowing that. We know carbon dating's flawed, so we can't really ultimately find out how old those documents are. But I think the people that can trace their family tree all the way back, that have maybe got things that have been passed on, I think that they belong to the previous civilization because people did survive. The story about the Normans, I wasn't there. So again, is that a backstory? Did it happen? We just don't know. All we know is what we're told. And we know that we're told an awful lot of things that aren't true. So I don't know, but I would suggest looking at Anatoly Fomenko's work. I mean, I've broken down the nuts and bolts of it in my book. But actually, if you're really interested in how they did it, how they falsified documents, often with buildings, they would add a 1 or an M at the front. Early tombstones would have a J, which represents the millennial reign of Christ, and then just 3 digits. And they would adapt things. So a lot of things were falsified, but they did miss off the odd document. They did miss off the odd building as well. There's actually several in Scotland where they've missed off, and it's just 3 digits. And I found a tomb in Portugal that's the same as well. So we don't know, but Anatoly Fomenko believes that they falsified documents. And there was a price to pay if you didn't go along with it. Anyone else?
It's been a fantastic insight into Italia. I really enjoyed it. I had to leave for 10 minutes, and I'm like, yeah. But could I just ask, Antarctica, the idea that, you know, you're not allowed to fly over Antarctica, is that linked to, could that in any way be linked to the fact that the geography of our planet has we've been lied about as well? Is that linked back to the big lie about all of this as well?
I don't know. It wouldn't have covered, because Tartaria really was the northern hemisphere. But what I do find interesting with that, and you'll have to tell me, Dan, when I'm running out of time. Are we all right? The interesting thing with the Antarctic Treaty, is that you've got countries that are at war with each other, that hate each other, that still stand by it. So I think with regard to Antarctica, the reason that we're obsessed with it and what's going on there and the iced walls and what's beyond that is because I think it's the north that we should be looking at. Hyperborea. Yeah. Because again, they invert absolutely everything. So I think, you know, our fascination, it's a bit like UFOs, we look up, but I think they come from the water. So, yeah. Yeah, so we don't know. We know we've got the Van Allen belt, you know, it's also referred to as the firmament, so we're not sure if anything can get in and out through that. But I think whenever the system tells me to look south, then I look north. Yeah, but Hyperborea I think might be where it's going on. But yeah, and I call Tartaria an echo of Atlantis. But a lot of people actually say it's actually an echo of Hyperborea, what's really going on. So I don't know if there's much at the South Pole or not.
But that might explain the American interest in Greenland.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, my cousin's a researcher there. And yeah, there's some strange things going on. A lot of people coming and going.
Australia do not enter.
Sorry?
Australia, the land of Australia, there's a huge area you're not allowed to go past, and that's certainly come out fairly recently to the mainstream, if you want to call it mainstream us. You know.
I hadn't seen that. No, thank you for that. I'll have to have a look. But I don't watch the news, so I'm sort of not.
I was thinking like Kim Gojin, and I think she brought that up as well. Talked about, you know, Kim. Have you heard of her?
No.
Okay. Yeah, she's on Best News here, but she's linked. I'll talk to you about it.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I've not heard of that. Anyone else got any questions? No. Well, thank you for listening. Oh no, sorry. Yes, 2 people. Sorry. Hi.
So, most history books say that, like, the Mayans and Olmecs and that, those civilizations, they just disappeared without a trace.
Yeah.
Like, for no reason. Could that be connected to Tartaria?
Well, it's a lot earlier than that, but I think it's another reset. So was that the Great Flood that we hear about? Is that connected to the Younger Dryas period, for example? But of course, you know, with regard to what remaining civilizations they had left, the Spanish went over and finished those off. So I don't know. It's not something I've really spent a lot of time looking into, but I think it was a reset. I think there have been a huge number of resets where they do wipe out civilizations and then can't explain the architecture afterwards. And I also think they then build on top of what was there before to sort of make it their own, in a sense. Sorry, sir.
Just a bit of a technical question. You mentioned that St Paul's is 432 hertz.
Was, yeah, sorry, yeah.
So how would you gauge that? When did that change? And are you familiar with Tanya Harris's work?
No, I'm not. But it was in the 50s. The Rockefeller Institute changed all of the bells, all the pipe organs and music to an industry standard of 440 hertz. But classical music is still 432, which is why I think that it's. I'm not saying I like it or dislike it, but it's very popular with parasitic people. That would be their music that, for example, the Rockefellers, for example, or the Rothschilds would go to an opera house. They're listening to the correct music in the correct environment at the correct frequency, and we're pumped the wrong music at the wrong frequency. So I think that's very, very specific and no coincidence. But yes, it did vibrate at 432. It now vibrates at 440.
Called Supernature, written many, many, many years ago, where they were trying to look at the relationship between plants and music.
Yeah.
Plants rock music. They shied away.
Yeah.
When they played classical music, they did the opposite.
Yeah, and again, we know, everybody here knows, don't we, that everything ultimately is frequency and vibration. And water does that as well. You can actually see the water structure change. If you play it, Imagine by John Lennon, for example, it makes the most incredible shapes. And if you play it, and if you scream or shout at it or abuse a glass of water, then the shapes are actually quite aggressive. Sorry, did somebody? Yeah, sorry.
Just going to Russia at around about the time of the revolution. Now, we were saying earlier about Tartaria was still in existence until the Second World War.
Well, it had been broken down before that, but there were remnants of it.
So, with the understanding of what occurred in Russia with the Tsar was executed as his family was, and then there was a rush to take over Russia. Mm-hmm. And what followed was the Holodomor, which is not very much mentioned, which is by far the biggest devastation of a country of people, Christians, Muslims, all religions, because they wouldn't follow a particular suit. And they pretty much decimated the Russian people, the truth of them, all the way through to the Second World War and continued until the modern day. So,
yeah, I've actually given a little bit of information on that in my book. So thank you. Yeah, but yeah, absolutely right. Yeah, and it's not talked about that much.
And I think even during the time that it occurred, the newspapers weren't covering it. They refused to cover it. Everything was obfuscated. People were sent over there, and they come back with the reports, and the reports were taken. And so and again, it's another reset.
Yeah.
At the moment, I'm seeing that reoccurring, and they're working towards that.
Yeah.
For the world right now.
Yeah.
It's quite scary.
Yeah.
We're in a different element of energies right now, and we have got something behind us.
Yeah, I think so. I think people need to realise that we have this power, we have this potential. And it is, I think we've been bogged down with worrying about things, the cost of living, or, is there going to be another pandemic? Yeah, so we live in this constant state of fear, a much lower vibration, and I think we can kind of get through that, and by not participating. I don't watch the news, I don't listen to the radio, I don't buy newspapers, and when people send me information, I say I don't want to read it. I don't care what's going on. This is propaganda. This is how you fuel it. This is how wars start, by us, all joining in and worrying about what's going on somewhere. So I think we've got to disengage and focus on our own. It's a little bit like the whole world's got sort of Stockholm syndrome. The people that we despise are the people that we go to when we need help, but we have the ability to help ourselves and each other without asking them. Well, I think that's it. Thank you very much. Well, thank you for listening.